Okay, grasshoppers, as promised, this is your lecture, your introductory lecture on Judaism. If you guys were in class right now, I'd be giving you this lecture live, but I feel like, especially for these first couple, I'm going to record them so you can kind of rewatch them if you need to, or just as a reminder, or maybe if you missed some of these early classes. You can watch it and still accomplish what I need you to accomplish, okay? So this is the basics of Judaism, right? There may be Jewish people in my classes right now, and they're like, whoa, it's way more than this, but you need to realize that I'm just giving you guys what is known as a survey on the world religions. I am not seeking to convert anybody. I'm not seeking to do a graduate school intensive understanding of every single one of these religions. I'm doing a basic breakdown of these religions so that you can kind of understand what's going on. And the reason I do this is because years ago, in teaching world studies honors, we would get to events in history, particularly in European or like Middle Eastern history, where my students didn't understand the conflict because they didn't understand the differences in these religions or what they believe, okay? So think of this as comparative religious studies. That's what we're doing. And the first religion we're going to begin with is Judaism. So I will begin by sharing my screen with you, and we're going to go through, the basics of the Jewish religion. So I'm bringing up right now the lecture outline that exists in your Canvas module lesson, okay? So if you look, this is a continuation of what we will have just talked about in class, okay? And so now we're looking at the basics of the Jewish religion. And the first thing that we have to remember is the origins, okay? So some important things about the Jewish religion. First of all, it's ancient. Of the three Abrahamic religions that I'm going to teach you about in here, Judaism is the oldest. Okay, if you want to be real strict about the timeline of it, it goes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in that order. Okay, Islam is actually the most recent of the three Abrahamic religions to appear on this earth, okay? Judaism, and then out of Judaism comes Christianity, and out of both Judaism and Christianity comes Islam, all right? So I'll get to that later, but for now, you kind of need to understand that Judaism is the oldest, and it is a monotheistic religion. So you look here, follow my cursor, you see monotheistic means a belief in one God, a supreme God. The name of that God in the Jewish religion, the kind of typical all-powerful name for that God is Yahweh, okay? And I don't have Yahweh spelled anywhere on here. If you'd like the spelling, I could give it to you live in class. But it is a one God religion, which was, if you go back thousands of years when Judaism first showed up on the scene, was kind of unique to them, okay? They believe in one God, and that God was actually pretty personal. I mean, I know a lot of you guys think of like God of the Old Testament as like this mean, vengeful God or whatever, but really it was also a God that the Jewish people believed cared about them, and that they believed they were the special people chosen by God, okay? And so it is a monotheistic religion, believing in one God, and that God will use the term Yahweh, even though there are many different terms that the Jewish people use for God, depending on what they wanted to emphasize about him, okay? So then we have to understand that the Jewish religion is what we call an Abrahamic religion, meaning they trace their lineage back to this patriarch or founding father named Abraham, okay? So there are actually three different Abrahamic religions. As you are taking note on this, you should know that the three Abrahamic religions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, okay? So that gives you kind of a sense of these are the big three, right? So they're kind of related to each other in this, that they all trace their lineage back to this patriarch, this character, which is in the ancient scriptures named Abraham, all right, and his wife Sarah. So let's let me kind of draw something on the board for you guys so you get a picture of this, and I'll go back to screen sharing here in a minute. If I were to map this out for you, okay, and how this kind of story goes. The story goes that thousands of years ago, people had kind of walked away with God, or walked away from God. The Jewish religion in the what we would call the Old Testament, they would call the Torah. I'll talk more about that later. They have an origin story about Adam and Eve who sinned in the Garden of Eden and were cast out, right? And they had to kind of live being rejected from the Garden of Eden by God because of the sin that they committed. Interestingly, all three Abrahamic religions have this story. They have, the Jews have it, Christians have it because they follow this story as part of their scripture, and Muslims have this story as well, a slightly varied version of it. But okay, so the story goes that after Abraham and Sarah were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, Abraham and Sarah, excuse me, Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. What happened was humans started to sin, right? They started to walk away from God, right? And after a while, there was really only like one guy left that God could count on, right? And his name was Abram, and it's going to be, his name will be changed to Abraham, but I'm going to put him on the board here. Okay? And Abraham is married to a woman named Sarah. Okay? So these two were very old, and the problem was, according to the Jewish scriptures, and this is called the Torah. These stories are called the Torah. I'll get into the scripture after the story again a little bit, but we're talking about origins right now. So thousands of years ago, Abraham and Sarah were married, but they were old. They were like way older than me. I mean, I know you guys look at me and you're like, this guy's pretty old. But these guys, they're like 137 years old. I mean, they're old people, okay? And the story goes that God goes to Abraham and says, I'm going to make you a great people. Like, you are going to be my people and my beloved people, your descendants, because you have stayed faithful to me where everybody else has kind of gone astray, right? So you and your wife, Sarah, are going to have a child, and that child will be, through that child, I will create a great nation, okay? But the problem is Abraham and Sarah are 137 years old, right? They're like, how do we have a child? We're beyond, like, I mean, all right. Guys can have children well into old age. Like, they're able to, like, things still work into old age, but women, not so much, right? There's a clock ticking. And so they're so old, they're like, this isn't going to happen. So what happens is that Sarah offers up her maidservant, Hagar, okay? And I'm not even sure if I spelled that right, but it is what it is, okay? So, Sarah's got an idea, right? And that idea is, Abraham, why don't you have sex with Hagar, our much younger maidservant, right? Who is still of childbearing age, and we'll have a child, and like, that's how we get around the fact that we're both 137 years old, right? And so Sarah offering her husband a surrogate to have sex with, to have a baby. All right. Now that sounds like a total like episode of the Maury Show or something today, right? Like you are the father. I told you. Right? It's like one of those things, right? It seems like that. But this story is in your Old Testament, in your Bible. Okay, you just probably never heard it told this way. So Hagar sleeps with Abraham, and they have a child, and that child's name is going to be Ishmael. Okay, and again, I'm not sure I spelled that right, but I'm doing the best I can off the cuff here, right? Now, Ishmael is the firstborn, but is also a constant reminder to Sarah about how, she was unable to have a kid. So you can see where this is going. Back then, people lived as family groups together, and they traveled all over the place. They were a bit nomadic. And Ishmael's presence is a constant reminder of Sarah's failure, right, to have children. And it doesn't take long before Sarah and Hagar start to they don't get along, right? They don't get along. And Sarah eventually is going to kick Hagar out of the household into the desert, leave, right? And Hagar's going to cry out to God and be like, what did I do wrong? To get, it wasn't my decision to sleep with Abraham. I'm the maidservant, blah, 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 right? Well, here's the deal. God, according to the Old Testament story of this, right, in the Hebrew or Jewish scriptures, God comes to Abraham and says, at him and Sarah, and said, why didn't you guys believe me? Why did you take matters into your own hands, right? I told you that you would make a great, you'd have a great people, and they would be my people through your son. But instead of trusting me, you took matters into your own hand, right? And you introduced the Hagar into the mix, okay? Abraham and Sarah have this moment where you see this a lot in the Bible, right? This kind of woe is me, tear your shirt and put ashes on your head, or they'd fall right off my head. But ashes on your head and just be like, oh, I'm so sorry, Lord. And God's like, all right, I'll give you another chance, do it right this time. So Abraham and Sarah, who are 137 years old, do what people do to create a child. And right now in your mind, you're picturing your grandparents having sex, and you're like, blind my mind's eye. All right. But the reality is that's how babies are produced. So these old folks, all right, sleep together, and they produce another child, Isaac. Okay. So now you got two children. Let's keep track of this with the color. You got Ishmael and you got Isaac, right? So in this kind of religious environment, back in the day, it's very patriarchal. And what we mean by that is that it's very male dominated, okay? And you got two sons now that are being born. And the question is, which of these sons is rightfully the inheritance, right, for the Jewish people? Like which one of these sons is God going to bless and create a entire group of people through, a nation, if you will, an Israelite nation, right? And that's the problem, because once Isaac is born, obviously Sarah and Abraham are really going to put their attention towards Isaac, and Hagar and Ishmael kind of get lost in this. And eventually Hagar and Ishmael are kind of cast out, right? We're gonna build through Isaac, right? So interestingly enough, if you follow the way these two religions, Judaism and Islam, look at this relationship between the original Abraham and Sarah, Isaac becomes the father of the Jewish nation. Okay? Whereas Ishmael, God says to Hagar in this story, I'm not going to forget you. It's not your fault that Abraham and Sarah didn't listen to me. So I too will use your son to create a great people, basically. All right? And that's where the Arabs trace their lineage back to. Okay? And of course, it's through Saudi Arabia that eventually Muhammad shows up, and Muslims trace their lineage, right? So what you got here is an origin story where both Jews and Muslims trace the lineage back to Abraham and Sarah as an origin story. And so if you think about it, what problems could this cause, right? Like you would think, oh, they must be great. They must be brothers, right? Like the two religions get along just perfectly. Jews and Muslims get along just great, right? I mean, after all, they trace their lineage back to Abraham and Sarah, you know. But I don't think it takes much to see the conflict that's going to come out of this, right? Because Jews are going to claim Isaac was the legitimate child. That was the one that actually was the product of Abraham and Sarah, right? And therefore, the legitimate son in the line of God's people, right? Whereas Muslims are going to say, ah ha ha, firstborn means something, especially firstborn male. We were the first. Ishmael was born first, and he therefore deserves all the birthrights of being first. And so as the Muslims trace their lineage through Ishmael to Abraham, the Muslims will say, we're the legitimate people of God. Whereas the Jews are going to say, no, we're the legitimate people of God because this was not a child had out of wedlock. This is the one that was supposed to be, right? So what do you got? The fact that Jews and Muslims trace their lineage back to Abraham and Sarah is actually a source of conflict and not brotherhood, okay, in a lot of ways. Now, we're going to continue on with the story, so I'm going to share the screen again. So there you got a depiction of Abraham and Sarah there. And what ends up happening is the Jewish people end up forming a nation out of this. And what they do is ultimately they set up a system of sacrifice and atonement. So the basic Jewish belief is that people sin, and that sin requires blood sacrifice, right? If we go back to the Bible, what we would call as Christians, I should say, they call it the Bible, and this story is part of the Old Testament, all right? And it's in the first couple books of the Bible. And sin and sacrificial atonement, meaning that every time somebody sins, blood is required, right, to pay for that sin. And that is why the Jewish people would set up a temple that the priest, like they would periodically bring like animals to be sacrificed at that temple. And you bring the animal according to your status in the society. So if you could afford to bring like a cow, you did. If all you could afford was like a dove or something, that's what you did. And then you sacrificed that animal. And that blood was meant to make up for the fact that we are all sinful and therefore we cannot please God. So the sacrifice is a way to like please God in lieu of him punishing us for sinning. All right, we're sacrificing these animals instead. Now, those of you that are Christian in here might be familiar with the phrase Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, okay, to describe Jesus. We will bring the connection to Jesus in later, but for now you understand that in the Jewish religion, traditionally, blood sacrifice is required for the sins that you commit, okay? And you know that the Jews eventually came up with something called the Ten Commandments, but there are many more. There's actually a book in what Christians would call the Old Testament that is called the Book of Leviticus. And it is filled with many, 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 many laws. Like we're familiar with the top 10, right? The so-called 10 Commandments. Honor your mother and father, do not lie, be deceitful, do not commit adultery, blah, blah, blah. We're familiar with those, but there's actually like hundreds of laws that the Jewish people had to follow. Everything from, how to handle somebody in the community who's sick. That's kind of relevant today. As well as how to properly worship God, what to do with property rights, how to treat each other, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of these laws in the Jewish religion. And I included the Hebrew alphabet here because that was the original like Hebrew language. And like, if you have a holy version of their holy book, which is called the Torah. So now if you look down here with my cursor where it says, right, the Torah, that is the collection of Jewish holy books, like the Torah, okay? It is the first, it basically includes the first 5 books of the Bible that Christians look at among others. Okay, so their holy scriptures are called the Torah. Is written in Hebrew, and it lays out the laws and such that the Jews are supposed to follow, as well as how they handle things like sinning and sacrifice and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So I told you guys about Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Ishmael, all right? Then, as you know, eventually the Jewish people are going to kind of wander around in what today we would call the Near East or Middle East, right? Until they find themselves enslaved by the Egyptians, okay? So they're basically like this minority culture that follows one God and nobody else really does. And so they kind of get persecuted for that. And they find themselves as slaves in Egypt, right, under the Pharaoh. And many of you know this story where, this guy shows up on the scene named Moses, who gets adopted by the Egyptian royal family, okay? And Moses ends up getting a vision from God. And again, I'm abridging the story tremendously because this isn't Sunday school. I'm trying to give you a sense of the history of the Jewish people. And Moses gets a vision from God of this burning bush, right? A lot of us know this story. And God says to Moses, go and free my people. And Moses is kind of like, well, how am I supposed to do that? They're not just going to let me in and believe me that you say that I'm supposed to free them. And so the Lord, Yahweh, right, says to Moses, you're going to perform these miracles on my behalf. And, you might remember the story. He goes to the Egyptians and he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh, who is the king of Egypt, is like, no. They're too valuable to me. We're building the pyramids, blah, blah, blah. I'm not letting them go. And Moses then is able to cast down his stick, right, and do several miracles or plagues, right, in front of the Egyptians. And there were several plagues, right? I think there were 10 of them, I want to say. And they were all like things like what's depicted here. The locusts will come over the land and like swarm and eat everything of value. There's a plague of like boils breaking out on the skin, right? People are covered in this like disease. There's a plague where the water turns to blood, frogs, like all kinds of different plagues. And you would think that would be enough to convince Pharaoh, but somehow it's not. And ultimately, the only thing that convinces Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go is when God gives Moses the ability to call on the angel of death, okay? And the angel of death comes in and is supposed to kill every firstborn, person in Egypt, right? As the final plague. This will be the one that will convince Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go, okay? And there's a great song about this, incidentally, that Metallica wrote called Creeping Death. Look it up. And if you see the lyrics, it's told from the perspective of the angel of death. But Moses is told, in order to protect the Jewish people, you guys are going to have to slaughter some of your best animals, like the finest lambs that you have, right? You sacrifice them and you take the blood and you put the blood over your door, right? And when you do that, the angel of death will pass over your house because it'll know that you are amongst the Jewish people, and it will kill all the firstborn of everybody else, but not you. And so the Jews do this, and to this day, they celebrate, if you look at the holidays, Passover is the celebration of the fact that the angel of death spared the Jewish people, okay? And that idea of slaughtering a lamb, right, to pay for our sins is something that we're going to come back to when we talk to Christianity, when we talk about Christianity, because these three religions are related. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're related, okay? So this Passover is a celebration of the angel of death passing over the Jewish people. Meanwhile, Jewish people today also celebrate Yom Kippur. It's like a Jewish New Year, but it's like a time where Jewish people fast and remember everything that they owe to God as a result of him making them a nation okay? And it's a way of them to deny themselves. So Passover and Yom Kippur are kind of both ways in which the Jewish people recognize God's saving authority in their lives, okay, basically. So eventually the Jewish people get out of Egypt. Moses leads them forward, and they find themselves settling in what is today Palestine. And I'll show you a map of this later, right? But they settle in Palestine, which is today modern Israel. It's right along the Mediterranean, okay? And when they're there, they set up the important city of Jerusalem. Now, this, grasshoppers, cannot be overstated. Jerusalem is the holiest city for the Jewish people. It's where they built a permanent temple to God, where the sacrifices would take place, okay? And it's really, really, like, this is where the politics come in, because over the years, Jerusalem will eventually become also a holy city for Christians and Muslims. So you're going to have three major religions in the region, all Abrahamic, all viewing Jerusalem as a holy city. But the Jews are the ones who built it and put the temple there, okay, so they can worship God and sacrifice, etc. Well, eventually the Roman Empire comes in, right? Now, I don't know how many of you guys learned about the Roman Empire, but you're talking about an empire that basically existed about 1,000 years ago or so. And the Roman Empire dominated huge segments of the Mediterranean and beyond. Okay, it was the most powerful empire in the region. And the Romans, and these are my people, the Italians, right? This is our like heyday, right? So they did all these things, and one of the things that the Romans did, and the Romans expanded their empire through conquering. One of the things they did was they conquered the Jewish people in Palestine there. When they did, they destroyed the temple, okay? And when the temple was destroyed, the Jewish people were scattered all over the Near East and Africa and into Europe. So with the Jewish people scattered, now what you have is a disconnect between them and their like ancestral lands, okay? So for a long time, the Jewish people wanted to return to their lands, right? While they're living abroad and split, cut off, right? Some of them stayed in Palestine and were ruled by the Roman Empire. Some of them moved to other places, right? That is known as the Jewish diaspora, okay? Let me kind of spell that up here for you. Take this all off. Okay. All right, and the Jewish diaspora, I don't even know if you can read it from there, but when we're live, I'll make it larger, refers to the scattering of the Jewish people, okay? While they were scattered, and they were scattered for a very long time, I mean, you're talking like hundreds of years, the Jewish religion kind of split over time into Orthodox and Reformed versions of the religion, okay? And so the Orthodox Jews did their best to try to hold to the Jewish scriptures as closely as possible. So Orthodox Jewish people want to take the old scriptures literally. If it says you're supposed to do this, then you need to do it, okay? They also use something called the Talmud, which is a series of laws and stuff that the Jewish people embraced in addition to the old Torah, right? But they're trying to follow this as exactly as possible to the letter, okay? If you want to know, people that follow their religion to the letter are called fundamentalists. You're going to want to write that down because that's an important term. Fundamentalism is something we're going to be coming back to later, okay? Orthodox Jews are much more fundamentalist, whereas Reformed Jews, okay, decided that they were more interested in kind of fitting into the places that they were scattered to. So Reformed Jews tend to be a little more modern. As times changed, Reformed Jews adapted to the time, okay? They were not as strictly patriarchal or male dominated as the Orthodox Jews still kind of remained. Reform Jews were interested in adapting over time and changing their religion to the circumstances, whereas Orthodox try and stick true to the old code, right? And you see this picture of Orthodox Jewish people meeting together, right? And you can see that they're like old school in their like clothing and the way they wear their like beards and stuff like that. Whereas Reformed Jews, I mean, it's very likely you would meet somebody from the Reformed Jewish tradition and you wouldn't even know they were Jewish because they're blending in more, okay? Whereas Orthodox are not, they're interpreted a much more strict version. So you got the split that takes place in Judaism, all right? And you see here, I've got the rabbinical system with the Talmud. Eventually, because the Jews didn't have a homeland anymore, they developed a rabbinical system. There are these teachers called rabbis. And these rabbis kind of looked after Jewish congregations wherever they were located around the world where they were scattered. And each local Jewish location set up something called a synagogue, okay? And a synagogue is a church. It's basically like a church. It's a meeting place, okay? And the rabbi is the local, basically, leader of the synagogue, wherever that synagogue is located around the world in North Africa or Europe or the Middle East, right? This rabbi system became a way for Jewish people to kind of like rectify the fact that they had been scattered, okay? And they're going to live like this for a very long time, for hundreds of years, really, okay? Eventually, there came a time when Jewish people argued they needed to return back to their original homeland in the Torah, in what Christians would call the Bible, in Palestine, okay? Those people, the movement, to return back to the Jewish ancient homeland, if you look on my screen share here, is called Zionism. Zionism is the desire for the Jewish people to return back to the ancient homeland that it was written about in the Torah 1,000 some odd years ago, thousands of years ago. They want to return to that homeland, okay? The problem is, by the time Zionism became a thing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, okay, there were already other people living in Palestine, many of whom were Muslim, okay, known as Palestinians. So when the Jewish people are going to ask to return, that is going to cause a new conflict for that land, okay? So that's where I'm going to finish this kind of lecture today. Let me stop the screen share. Well, first, you can see the bullet point. Now that you're finished with this, at home in your notebooks, whatever, write a 3 or 4 sentence explanation. To what extent did Judaism change over time, right, from biblical days to present? And that's something that we'll talk about in class together. Okay, so let me stop the screen share, and I'll see you guys in a minute.